Okay, let's step up finding inverses just a notch. So we're going to find the inverse function of f of x equals the square root of 2x minus 3. But we're going to be very conscientious from this point forward of the domain and the range. The domain of this function is 3 over 2 to infinity. So we solve 2x minus 3 is greater than or equal to 0, and we get the domain being 3/2 to infinity. We know with the square root function, we're going to get 0 out all the way to positive infinity in this case, so our range is 0 to infinity. Now we're going to find the inverse function. So we're going to exchange the x's and y's, so we change f of x to y, and then we swap them. So I have x equals the square root of 2y minus 3. Now I'm going to square both sides, so I get x squared equals 2y minus 3. I'm going to add 3, and then we multiply both sides by 1/2. So we have y equals 1/2 times the quantity x squared plus 3. I'm going to change that to f inverse of x equals 1/2 times the quantity x squared plus 3. But when we look at this x squared plus 3, all times 1/2, when we look at that quadratic, we know that there's no restrictions. There's no radical sign anymore, so there's no restrictions. However, remember that your range becomes your domain. So the domain has to be 0 to infinity. So we have to say x must be greater than or equal to 0. That is a must. Otherwise, the reader never realizes that you can't put negative values in for x in this particular case. So we have to be very conscientious. The range of the function becomes the domain of its inverse. And this range was restricted, which means the domain on the inverse will also be restricted. So here's one for you to try and think about. And I'm also going to talk about this one. So if you want to try this one on your own, press pause. So here we're given f of x equals x squared plus 2. And they're telling us the domain is 0 to infinity. So they're telling us x is greater than or equal to 0. We already know that the range is going to be 2 and higher. So y is going to be greater than or equal to 2. Let's find the inverse. So we have y equals x squared plus 2. X equals y squared plus 2. We're going to subtract 2 from both sides. And then we're going to square root both sides. So we have y equals the square root of x minus 2. I'm not going to put plus or minus because my outputs have to be positive. So my outputs, the domain is going to become the range, and the range becomes the domain. So your range must be 0 or greater. So if I put a plus or minus here, that means my outputs would be negative, and that would disregard this range. Therefore, in this case, I am not going to put plus or minus. This right here is getting taken out. So f inverse of x is equal to the square root of x minus 2. Now, do I need to put that x has to be greater than or equal to 2? Do I have to come here and now say, well, x has to be greater than or equal to 2? Absolutely not. And the reason being is because it's already defined in the equation. The square root of x minus 2 means that you can't put anything less than 2 into that radical. Otherwise, it doesn't work in the real number system.